A major review of Scotland's business rates has recommended that leisure centres, some golf clubs, private schools and universities should be brought under the system. The Barclay report into non-domestic rates has also recommended that childcare centres should be exempt. The review was commissioned by the Scottish Government in March last year, following strong accusations that the rates were unfair. Our business correspondent David Henderson has more.
This report has not gone down the road of radical changes, but the reforms recommended bring quite significant changes for some. So, for example, councils which set up arm's-length organisations with charitable status, which have the effect overall of avoiding paying £45 million in business rates per year, they're being told that should end. Private schools are being told they should pay £5 million a year. Universities, which rent out student accommodation during holidays, would also be charged for doing that.
Our business correspondent, David Henderson, is here. Hello.
Hi, John. Hi.
Remind us what business rates are, who has to pay them, and who doesn't.
Well, in Scotland, domestic homeowners pay council tax. Scottish businesses don't. Instead, they pay business rates. The amount that shops and offices and pubs and hotels and warehouses and factories pay is based on a rateable value. This valuation of a property is broadly based on an analysis of what annual rental values would be. This review has come about because of concern about the way the current system works. Concerns from some that it wasn't fair, claims that it could hinder the growth of the Scottish economy. Because business rates raise almost £3 billion for spending in Scotland, it's really important for bigger businesses. It's probably the second highest cost that's paid after corporation tax. For many smaller businesses, it's often the highest cost for them. So a lot of concern about it. And the Scottish Government commissioned a review of business rates back in February. They commissioned the former banker, Ken Barclay, to do this. He's come up with a series of recommendations today, and he told us there was a guiding principle in what he was recommending. Fundamentally, he thought it was about delivering fairness.
We have recommended that if a ratepayer has properties in more than one location, that they get one bill, that online billing is available, and that when the assessors look at their property, when they're reviewing the assessment of the rates that should be paid, that there's a better quality of engagement between ratepayer and assessor to ensure that the ratepayer understands how much is being paid in tax, how it's calculated, and how the assessment of his property is undertaken.
And David, lots of changes.
Lots of changes, yeah. This report has not gone down the road of radical changes, but the reforms recommended bring quite significant changes for some. So, for example, councils which set up arm's-length organisations with charitable status, which have the effect overall of avoiding paying £45 million in business rates per year, they're being told that should end. Private schools are being told they should pay £5 million a year. That brings them in line with council schools. Universities, which rent out student accommodation during holidays, would also be charged for doing that. Now, there's also plans there to encourage business growth. Buildings expansion and improvements would not be liable for business rates for a year. Revaluations will be more frequent. There could be reductions in bills to help town centres hold on to shops and hotels and restaurants. And one other interesting headline from all this, John, top golf courses at golf clubs will have to pay for the first time. That means the likes of Trump Turnberry being hit with higher taxes.
Any other key recommendations?
Well, the focus of this was about the reason why this review was ordered back in the spring, if you recall, was really concern about higher rates, particularly in the northeast, and it goes some way to answering those concerns, but not entirely. The problem with the last revaluation is that it took effect at the wrong moment for many businesses. The valuations are based essentially on what annual rental values would be, and it's possible that some businesses, particularly hotels, pubs, some offices were doing well back in April 2015 when the current value was fixed, but now they're struggling because of the downturn in the oil and gas industry. That's what prompted this review. There was a lot of concern about that the businesses in the northeast were going to be affected by a valuation which took place when the oil price was high. If you recall, the Scottish Government stepped in back then and capped increases for 8,500 firms in the hospitality sector. They capped that rise at 12.5%. Offices in Aberdeenshire and Aberdeen also got that cap. And there'll be some disappointment perhaps that today's measures don't go as far as they would like in addressing some of those concerns and helping them further. But there is this promise of more regular revaluations. So the ups and downs in the market would not be set in stone. They'll still have to pay much more than they might like, but it's not forever.
All right, David, thank you. David. Leisure centres, some golf clubs, private schools and universities should be brought under the business rates system. This is according to a major review. The Barclay report into non-domestic rates in Scotland has also recommended that children's centres should be exempt, childcare centres. Now, independent schools do not pay business rates because of their charitable status, although council-run schools do. The recommended change would be a cost to the private sector of £5 million a year. Well, joining me now is John Edward, the director of the Scottish Council of Independent Schools. Mr. Edward, hello. What's your reaction to the news?
Good afternoon. It's fair to say we were a bit blindsided by this and extremely disappointed. And it's worth making the point from the outset that, of course, our schools do pay non-domestic rates. They pay 20p in the pound, all of which comes out of parents' pockets.
So you just explain to people then, at the moment, when it comes to a similar business and you don't pay the full rate of tax, do you? You pay 20p, so we subsidise 80p.
As with 24,500 other registered charities in Scotland, 60 of our schools are registered charities, and as a result they get mandatory relief of up to 80% of their non-domestic rates, and so paid 20p in the pound. The difference being that the report quotes state schools as paying rates. Of course, they don't pay rates. There's a paper calculation done by local authorities, but they don't sell sports equipment and lay off teachers to pay their rates bill, whereas every penny that we pay is new money into the system every year.
OK, but to get back to the central issue, you claim, you have charities, you're registered as charities, you get tested as charities, but you're saying that you then should get a reduction in the rates compared to other businesses. And I guess the central issue is, what makes you think private schools are charities?
Because many of them for centuries, or decades if not centuries, have been operating on the basis of providing the benefit, and the benefit they provide is the advanced education. That's one of the 14 charitable purposes in Scotland. Some of them have been doing that for a very, very long time.
Just explain advanced education, because the statistic for private schools in Scotland is 100% bursaries only go to 2% of pupils.
Which is the equivalent of a medium-sized school of about 700 pupils. And then at least a third of all pupils at independent schools receive bursary assistance, which is currently in a region of £45 million a year. They do that as an obligation and as obviously an intent because of who they are, because of the Charity Act in 2005, which this report effectively dismisses.
And a lot of the criticism of independent schools is that it looks like a private good for private individuals. So how exactly does the public benefit?
That's exactly what the independent charity regulator is required to look at through the Act from 2005 that the Parliament put in place. And every single school has been tested, more than any of the other 24,000 charities in Scotland, to demonstrate that the public benefit far outweighs private benefit. So, for instance, I was speaking to the head of one school today who gets probably £200,000 in tax relief, but puts out £1.3 million in bursary assistance. Now, the Scottish Council of Economic Advisers reckon that boarding alone brought £30 million into the Scottish Exchequer. Now, boarding is an extremely competitive global sector. If even a small fraction of that went to somewhere where they continued to get 20% relief, then obviously considerably more than £5 billion would be lost to the Scottish economy. And this report, after all, is not supposed to be about a political or personal belief on one or other sector, because there are plenty of other charities that charge fees and are restrictive. It's supposed to be about raising money for the Scottish Government, which this proposal palpably won't do.
Do you know, I'm a private school boy, and I've always been uncomfortable discussing this topic because having, if you look at the number of judges, of the 34 judges who sit at Court of Session, only a third or so attended state school. If you have a look at the first and second division judges in Scotland's College of Justice, of these 12, only 3 went to comprehensive school. It does appear that you may well provide some charitable help to some people, and we can all look at the bursary system and ask questions like, does that actually help disadvantaged families, or is it helping former pupils get their children back into school? No. But the reality would have to be, what exactly do you think you do for the country, as opposed to cancer research, or as opposed to a food bank, or as opposed to somebody gathered like Oxfam? What do you do that's comparable when you actually make money and you provide people with an education they buy?
The schools don't make money. They're registered charities. They cannot turn a profit. Taking your last point about other charities, this proposal would, of course, affect all our independent, complex additional sport needs schools, like those run by the National Autistic Society, by Capability Scotland as well. So they're being singled out in this. But the attainment that the schools achieve for individual pupils, it should be something that Scotland celebrates. And of course, there are pupils from all sectors.
John, come on, I'm a private school boy. Yeah. Should we really celebrate the fact that people who are rich can buy an advantage for the kids in terms of education? And you only give 2%. 100% bursaries only go to 2%.
The number of fee assistance that was given out before the Charity Act was somewhere in the region of £10 million. It's now £45 million a year. That is a far bigger widening access programme than any of the universities or any other academic college in Scotland has produced.
The charitable sector in Scotland's worth $5 billion. The charitable sector in Scotland
there are 30,000 pupils in our schools. That's equivalent to one local authority.
I'm only comparing your 45 million with the charitable sector in Scotland, which is $5 billion. So it's 10% of the entire size of Scotland's budget, if you like, is charitable, whereas yours is 45 million, which isn't a lot.
There's 24,000 bodies on Oscar's list. They are not entirely bodies that are run by volunteers who aren't paid. There are very, very substantial charities out there from the SEVO downwards who pay their staff considerable amounts of money to do a considerable job. And so, the money that comes in from fees goes out in teachers' salaries and teachers' pensions. And if somebody's telling me that those teachers don't attain and don't achieve for Scotland's children, and there are a substantial amount of children, and most schools who put out bursary assistance, which all of them do, will allocate the fund they have available to 100% applications first, then to 80%, then to 60%, then to 40%. So they're not pushing previous parents over the top. They're taking people who would not have had the chance, but who leap at the chance to get into a school and from which they benefit.
OK, John Edwards, thank you very much indeed from the Scottish Council of Independent Schools.